I'll start off with showing you the basics of odd count peyote. More or less, the way that it works is, if I show you the pattern real close just here, you've got all of your different colors. When you're working in peyote stitch, you work from one side and you work back and forth and back and forth and back and forth across the entirety of your work. With odd count peyote, there's an extra little turn, shall we say, that you have to do as part of reaching one end. One end you do a normal turn like you usually would for peyote stitch, but on the other end you do a second, slightly different turn. I've got as well part of it, it's got the full word chart of all the letters that you'll need to use, plus the colors. Everything is on the pattern. If you want to go and get the pattern, you can go and get it. This is how you read a peyote pattern. If you have a look, this is essentially what peyote looks like. In odd count, you'll see that you've got down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, all the way across. Odd count, it's called odd count because when you do your very first row, you have an odd number of beads. So if you have a look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it means you have more of those up beads and less of those down beads. The reason that you might want to use odd count is because if you have a look, you've got a nice exact central row. So if you have a design, for example like this one, that has a perfect central symmetry, you need to have an odd count so that it's directly symmetrical on both one side and the other side, symmetrical around this central point. Even count, obviously you would get two separate sides that can be the same, but there's no one single line down the middle that that sort of joins them in that way. I'll show you how we're going to do our very first little row here. So the first thing we need to do is grab ourselves some thread. I've got myself, obviously I wouldn't recommend using such a dark color when you make your own. It doesn't matter how much thread you use, you're gonna need to add in new threads as you go. So I'm gonna just use a nice comfortable length for me, whatever I find useful, and then I'll show you how we begin. Now I'm going to do it based on our little mermaid pattern here. So if you have a look, this is the start point. I haven't cut it out, but we do also give you on the pattern a little paper cutout. So you can cut out your row reader, more or less, and then lay it over the top of your pattern, and it will show you the beads that are in the row. So for example, the little cutout reader, if you cover it like that, you can see, okay, D, E, A, E, D, you know, and so on. Once you're a bit further down, you do also get the word chart included as well, though. When you start with peyote stitch, you do both rows 1 and 2 at the same time. So once I've got myself a little stopper bead on, more or less, if you don't know, to create a stopper, you just thread on a bead, bring it down towards the end of your work, leave yourself enough that you can weave it back in, and then just pass through that bead a few times to sort of lock it in place as our little stopper so that it works like a little anchor to stop the beads from moving around when we're trying to work against them. Pass through it a few times, and then when you try and move it, you'll see it doesn't move, it sort of sits in position. So anyway, if we follow the pattern, I've got my color A, my color B, my C, my D, and my E right there. And as we read on this little section, so 2 Ds, which is 2 of these little yellow ones, 1, 2, then 2 E's, 1, 2, 1 A, 2 more E's, then we've got, is it 3 D's? Really? Where's that? Oh yeah, right in the center. So 3 D's right in the middle. 1, 2, 3, which essentially, if we look at the pattern, that's this section just here. See, look, 1, 2, 3. So then I've got 2 E's. So it should say 2 E's, then 1 A, 2 E's, 1, 2, 2 E's, and then 2 D's, 1, 2. So we're adding all of these beads here in this sort of order. So bead 1 from row 1, then bead 1 from row 2, bead 2 from row 1, bead 2 from row 2, bead 3 from row 1, and so on. So once I've got that, 17 beads. If you've got 17 beads, you've got the right amount, and that is why it's called odd count peyote, because we have an odd number of beads on our row. So I can just slide those all the way down to my stopper, like that. And now I'm ready to weave backwards. It's time to do rows number 3 and onward. So if we have a quick look at our pattern, you can see I'm going to need 1 C, 1 D, so I might even lay them out just on my bead mat. one C, one D, one E, one D, one C, which C is that nice opal colour, one D, one E, one D, and one C. Now, the nice thing about this pattern is because it's symmetrical, you'll notice, look at this, one C, one D, one E, one D, and there's our central bead. And then it's exactly the same on both sides. Same on the other. Look, one C, two Ds, two Cs, and so forth. So the reason that there's a lot, you don't have to do the full 17 beads now, is because we're going to be doing peyote stitch and adding them into every second gap. I'll pick up one bead. So we're just working in like normal peyote here for the start. So we're going to loop around. If we have a look, we've got one bead just here. We're exiting that one. This is the last bead of that row 1 and row 2 that we just did. If we pick up the first bead of row 3, you skip the first bead and you pass down into that second little bead just there. So working in the opposite direction now, we can pull that all the way tight, and if we get that nice and firm against the end, you'll see that those two little beads sit nicely side by side. I'll just zoom in a touch so we can see it a little bit better. See that? Perfectly side by side, just like that. So that's called a peyote stitch. So I'll do my next peyote stitch. Pick up one bead, we skip one bead, and pass into the next one. So if you've done peyote stitch before, this will all be very familiar to you thus far. See that? We skip the first bead and into the second one. As we pull that tight, this little bead that we're adding is going to sit nicely beside the one that we added just before. See that? It's important though, when we're doing this, keep your fingers on the work so that the rows don't twist. So we keep those like this. I'll add my next one. Skip a bead and go into the one after. See, like that? Keep your thumb on it so it doesn't twist. Pull it tight. There we go. See, look, now they're sitting. So we can just continue down our work, adding bead after bead until we get to the opposite end. Try and keep your tail thread out of the way. It can be a little awkward, but we want to keep our thumb on that thing so it doesn't twist. And then I'll continue with the next little bead. Let's do a few more. Once we get past these first few rows, it becomes way quicker, way easier. So I'm adding my second last delica. This is where things change a little bit, just after we've added this second last bead to the row. So if we have a look, see that? I've got two beads left, but there isn't really anywhere, so if I wanted to pick one up, there isn't a bead to thread into, is there? You can't pass into the next bead. You've got to pass through this second bead as well. So this is a slight difference with that stitch. We're going to pass through at the end two beads, not just the one. So see that? We're coming out the very, very end here, and see how these are sitting now one below the other? This is where we're going to do our little turn, our little peyote turn. So if I bring in one bead, I'm going to loop around into this bead, and then into the bead of the previous row. Okay? So not this bead that I added just recently, the one from the row before. So if I pass down into that, I'll go into that first little bead buff there, and the one from the previous row. We're skipping that first bead into the second, and then the third bead of the previous row. Pull it all the way through, and that's going to sit now really nicely in position where you would expect it to sit, right? See, it's sitting in the right spot, but hey, we're sort of going in the wrong direction now. We're not going the right way. It's easy, though, to turn around. We're doing like a figure of 8. So coming out of this spot, we're going to jump straight across and into this bead on this side over here. So we're not going to pick up any beads. We're not going to pass into anything else. We're going to just go straight from here into this bead and turn ourselves around. If you have a look, we can go through that first bead. And hey, while we're here, let's go through the next one. And then that third bead as well from the previous row. See? So we're kind of bringing ourselves back to where we began, towards where we added this bead in. So we go through those 3 beads, pull it all the way tight, make sure your thread doesn't get caught or anything, so just check it, as you go. There you go. And now the thread is nicely hidden in this little gap. It goes straight up into there, through those 3 beads. And now if we come down into this bead, we're now back in position to continue with our next row. So first things first, once we've done this, we need to just check that our pattern is actually looking right. So see this? It looks good here. This line is going this way. This is kind of going that way. This is kind of going that way. But I've got a slight twist, I think. No, I don't. Yes, I do. Just the very last one has twisted, it seems. So when I get to that, I've got to make sure I go into the right bead. The easiest way to do that is just check, based on row 3, that you're going into the correct color. So I need to go from here into a gold. Once you get past this row, it becomes really easy. You don't have to worry about it anymore. It's super, super easy after this row. This is the one where you've just got to be careful. This is the one you need to be most careful with to make sure you get your pattern correct. So now I'm doing row 4. So if I have a look at row 4 real quick, it says I need 1C, which is one of my little ones just here, this color. And I'll pass into this little bead there. The good thing is it's a nice, fairly simple little pattern. And once you sort of start learning what it should look like, it's really easy to figure out what should come next. So if we have a look, we want to continue with the gold, which is a D. And we're just essentially filling the gaps. Every single time we're filling those little gaps. So now I'll pick up another colored D. Pass through there and pull that tight. See, look, that's starting to look good, isn't it? It's coming together. If it's twisting, make sure, there, this is the color that we want it to be through next. I've got a color C into there. Pull that tight. That fills that gap. Another color C and fill the gap. Pick up another color D, which is the gold. We skip that little downward sticking bead into the upward sticking bead and just fill that little gap. So you can see it becomes, the technique itself becomes super duper duper easy. Now I've just got to make sure this isn't twisted around the wrong way. There we go. That's around the right way now. Almost. There we go. So see that? We want both sides to look the same. So see this? It's kind of looking like that, looking like this. And we need to make sure that this side is the side that we're going to thread into. So pick up a D. See, right? This is the only time it can get a little difficult, is if this twists. So we just have to make sure that we're going into the correct beads. After this, it doesn't twist anymore. It's not possible to put it in the wrong spot. So it's really, really, really easy to just continue with your little pattern there. There we go, look at that. So that's our 4th row done. So now I'm going to flip it over because I find that that's easiest. There we go. So now that I've got this into position, see, I'm coming out of the very endmost bead. So we're going to do a normal turn. This is the thing with the odd count. One side you do a normal turn, the other side you do an odd count turn. So I'll do my next normal turn. So on this one, we're already coming out of that last bead. The way to know which one it is because we only had to pass through one bead, and there's a nice place we can just thread back straight into. We pull it tight, and it's going to just sit perfectly in that little gap. Now I'll grab my next bead, which, don't forget, if you want to get this pattern, it's available from our website if you want to get the pattern just on its own. And just continue with our little pattern here. See that? There's a nice gap. So we go into the one that's sticking out, filling each of those little gaps. Here we go. I'm now adding the second last bead once again. So whenever it comes to adding the second last bead, when you're finishing an odd numbered row, so for example, I'm doing row number 5. At the end of row number 5, I'm going to have to do an odd count turn. At the end of row number 7, I'm going to have to do an odd count turn. The end of number 9, and so forth. So here we go. If I go now from this little bead, I'm going to pass through both of these two just here, and I'm going to show you my odd count turn again. So let's add that second last bead, put that in, and go through both of these beads so that we're coming out of the very, very end. So now I need to pick up the last bead of the row that I'm currently doing, which I'm doing row number 5, and the very last bead of row number 5 is one of these color bees. So if I do my odd count peyote turn, essentially what I'm going to do, I'm going to add my bead just here, and I'm going to go diagonally into this bead, down into the one over here. We're doing a figure of 8, so we're going to go down and across, over into this bead, into this way, through all 3, and then we can come down that bead. So I'll show it to you a little slowly. I've picked up my bead, of course, pass down into that second bead, and the bead of the third row of the previous sort of column, as it will. The third little group there, in the third row there, and then the previous row. So see that? I'm now coming out of this little gold bead just here. So if I get my thread over, you can see coming out the gold bead there. If you have a look, we've got 5 little beads. This is the last bead of the row that we've added, but because we want to continue adding peyote, I need to be coming out of this bead in this direction. So the easiest way to do that is to jump across from this little gold bead through those 3 beads there, through all 3 of them. Ready? That's going to bring us back out to the end. Pull it all the way, and if you have a look, that little thread just disappears in there. And now I can go down into that little bead, the end of row 5, and in position now to do row 6. So I'll blast out. I'm going to flip my work over. I'll do row 6. So if you're new to peyote stitch, essentially peyote stitch, it's called fill the gap, is another name for it. So we pick up the next bead of our pattern, which in this case, it's one of these purple beads, color A, and we skip that bead and pass into the next one. And that will fill that little gap. And now this bead sticks out a little bit further, ready for our next row when we come back to it. So now I'll pick up the next little bead as well, which is a black. The dark ones, they're not actually black, but they look almost black, so I call them blacks. So into that little gap there, going to there, into the last little bead. There we go. So this is the end of row 6, which is a nice even number turn. So we can just do a normal peyote turn when we finish an even numbered row. So the way that you know it's an even numbered row, for example, is if you have a look, you can just count the bottom 2 rows. How many beads you have in the bottom 2 rows? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that means we've just finished row 6. So now I'm ready to start row 7. So when I finish row 6, I can do a normal peyote turn. When I finish row 7, that's when I have to do my odd count turn. Okay, so now I'm about to add the second last bead of this row. So when I put that in, I'm going to go through both beads to make sure that I can do my odd count peyote turn. So down there, I'm going to go through this once more. So just remember, we want to add a bead just here. The best way to do it is with that figure of 8 shape. So we're going to go down into this bead here. We're going to turn around and go down into this bead and the bead below of the row below, but the previous earlier row. See that? So down, we're going to do our figure of 8. I'll try and hold it super steady. Pull that through there. Ready? That's going to add the first little bead to the top, little corner here. Now I'm coming out of that little bead there. I'm going to jump across. I've just gone down this diagonal. So from this bead into that bead and that one, we're going to complete our figure of 8 by going up through these 3. Pull that all the way through, like so. And now we go back into that bead that we've just added, and we're in position to continue working again. So I'll pick up my next bead. all the way through. Pick up a gold. And another gold. And I think that will do us for now.